Hey guys, Nicholas DeMario here of SterlingKisses.com, and I wanted to show you the process of how I create a directional pad pendant in sterling silver from start to finish. So here we have a reproduction NES controller that I'm disassembling. I couldn't bring myself to tear apart an original NES controller and damage its directional pad since we'll have to cut into it a bit. So we're using this reproduction one instead. That, and it won't have any defects in it, any kind of scratch or divots, basic wear and tear from years of playing old school video games. And there's the directional pad coming out now. We're going to have to cut free those little tabs that kind of hold it into place. You can see them along the edges there. So a jeweler saw makes quick work of cutting those free. Now I'm taking this rubber polishing wheel and I'm just going over the areas that I cut to smooth them out, make them nice and flush. I didn't know if I wanted a little loop at the top of it for a bail or to just drill through it again like I did with the old version of this pendant. And I decided I like the look of it with just the hole straight through it. They can put a chain through or a black cord. I think it looks good. Just cleaning off the little burrs there. Drilling straight through. And I use a lollipop stick here. It just happened to fit right through. And we're filling in the back with wax because I want the back to be nice and flush, smooth, nice high polished surface on it. And we of course want that hole there in the back as well, so the lollipop stick will prevent the wax from filling it all in, and there'll be a nice hole to feed a chain through. This is just a little JB weld and a piece of metal wire here. That's going to act as our sprue. And we just carefully align it with the directional pad pendant here. Very precisely. Maybe too precisely. I used Liquicast for making my mold. It's a two-stage type of mixture. Here we have our directional pad pendant in the frame, and you have to measure this stuff out very precisely. Otherwise, it just won't cure right. Humidity will also spoil a mold. I've had that happen to a couple of molds. It's also a good idea to use 2 cups for mixing, because you want to scrape the sides really well. If any of it doesn't mix well for whatever reason, then there's going to be streaks of uncured material in your final mold. So it's a good idea to mix it and then pour it into a new cup and mix it more. Now we're vacuuming the mixture to get any type of air bubbles out of it. It expands quite a bit, as you'll see in this next shot. So you want to make sure your container and your frame is large enough. This stuff cures in about 24 hours, but it'll stay workable for about maybe half an hour. So if you needed to mix up another batch, if you didn't mix up enough the first time, then you have plenty of time to work with more. So we vacuum again to make sure that there's no air bubbles trapped around our model. And you'll see just how much it'll rise here. Now 24 hours later, the mold is cured, and we're going to try to take it out of the frame. It's actually pretty difficult. Takes a lot of twisting to pull it free of the glass, and a bit of careful prying to get it out of the frame. You'll see that the sprue broke free from the directional pad pendant, which is still inside, but that's fine. And we carefully cut it free with an X-Acto knife. And it's a good idea to mark which side is the front and which side is the back of your model. I like to try to make it so that the seam is going to be along more towards the back side of the model when I'm cutting the mold. We just cut these little notches here, these keys, so that every time we put the mold back together, it'll line up perfectly, so there's no like warping or distortion when we inject the wax. Now this part gave me a little trouble here, this tunnel that goes through the top of the pendant. We've cut one side free, but the other side, it doesn't want to come out. So we try our lollipop stick in there, gets it a little further, then push it the rest of the way with some tweezers. And you don't want to pull too hard on this stuff, it's pretty durable, but you can see how gently I'm going with it here. You also notice that there's an imprint in the back of the mold there where our wax was. It seems this stuff expands as it cures, and so that's going to require a little cleanup after we get our final waxes. And this shows me actually injecting wax into the mold. I like to inject it face down so that gravity does some of the work, filling in more of the details on the front. I'm going to use a mold release spray to help free the model. Cornstarch works pretty well too, but can leave a bit of a rougher surface quality if you just dust it on there. And after we take a look at our waxes and fill in any kind of little imperfections, and in this case the big divots that came out of our wax mold, they're good to sprue up to a sprue tree. At the top of that sprue tree is a resin printed model that'll be casting alongside these. You'll see those red wax sprues leading from the resin prints. That's just for blowing out any ash residue after burnout. That's specifically for the rapid prototype parts. That's completely unnecessary for wax. And this is a perforated flask that we're putting over the sprue tree. We're going to be using a vacuum casting technique to cast these. So all those holes are going to be drawing air towards every cavity that's inside the investment that we're getting ready to pour here. There's the old sherbet bucket. Been using that for mixing investment for years now. I'm adding some boric acid to the mix because I'm casting resin printed parts. And they have a tendency to expand and just break the investment and do all sorts of terrible stuff, so we need it stronger. And I find it helps a lot. But it also makes breaking the pieces free of the investment very difficult, and you'll see that later on. Here I gradually add in the investment mixture. I use Plasticast. Again, only because I'm using the resin printed parts. If I were just doing wax, then simple satin cast would have been fine. So I add it gradually instead of all at once. It just mixes better. You avoid getting too many lumps in there or anything. And we vacuum out any air bubbles in the investment mix. We just pour and then re-vacuum. It's the same deal with how we made the mold. You just want to make sure there's no air bubbles that get caught in there. I shake the table here a bit to help release any air bubbles. And we let them sit for about 2.5 hours, and then they go into the kiln. This is after the investment has been dried. I remove the cap, and there it goes. I clean up the investment around the vent areas and the gate itself to make sure there's no loose investment that might break free when I'm actually making a pour. The flasks are now placed into a kiln, and it's preheated, and you want to make sure that they're lifted up above the bottom of the kiln so that any vapors and wax and everything can burn out freely. I use airflow here to help with the burnout of the resin printed parts. It does seem to make a difference, so that chance I took drilling through the cover of my kiln there definitely, I think, paid off. And halfway through the process, we're going to flip these flasks. And this helps to ensure that there's no gas trapped inside the investment itself, inside any of the cavities. Since we're vacuum casting, I'm not sure if that's really as much of a concern. That might be a concern with centrifugal casting, but I do it anyways. About half an hour before pouring the silver, I take the flask out, and I'm going to apply a vacuum to those vents we made earlier, and that's going to suck out any ash residue, any leftover ash residue that might not have completely burned out from our resin prints that are in there. This has nothing to do with the wax parts. Those should be completely fine. Here's a close-up of me doing that to the other flask. It helps immensely when it comes to rapid prototype prints, especially in materials that aren't wax-like. It truly makes a big difference in surface quality. Here's my electromelt. I've already got my silver measured out and poured into it, and it takes about 20 minutes to heat up. You check in on it and give it a stir to make sure there's, everything is melted in there. And we're ready to cast. I inspect the gate to make sure that there's nothing there that might block the flow of the metal or anything gonna, slide in as we make the pour. I put it on the casting block and apply a vacuum. I always give it a little twirl there. It's more for luck than anything else. And then I make sure that we're pulling a good vacuum. We've got a good seal, and I make the pour. Looks good. Here's a close-up view of that for the second flask. And it started, wasn't as steady towards the end there, but came out good. After about 5 minutes, or well, more like 8 minutes, I quenched the flasks. This is such a hard mix of investment that it takes forever to just break free. Luckily, I've got these little holes on this perforated flask, so I can go in from the sides and break things free, loosen it up a bit, but it takes a lot of time. But the results are definitely worth it. This is usually close to the moment of truth here. Get it cleaned up a bit more, and sure enough, we've got a nice casting. I think they came out real nice. You'll see the backs here, they're a little rough since I had to fill them in by hand. I could have really done a better job smoothing them out, but that's how it went. So now using a jeweler saw, I'll just cut these free of the sprue tree. And I do so very carefully as not to scrape any of the other pieces as I'm cutting off the sprues. And here they are after being tumbled. I think even a tumbled finish looks nice on these pieces, but we'll clean them up even more and give them a nice high polish. There was a little air bubble here, so I just use an emery rod to even out the surface quality on that. And throughout this cleanup process, I use a lot of different emery rods and sticks and wheels. And it's like sandpaper, there's a lot of different grits that you can use. And you just go from the more aggressive grits down to the finer grits, and then finally onto the polishing wheel. And in the same way, there's a lot of different abrasive compounds that you can use on a polishing wheel for different results. More aggressive polishing compounds and more for the final polish. Now I stamped the piece with a 925 stamp. This is kind of a cheap stamp. I'm not too happy with it. It doesn't make a very good impression, so you'll see me wiggling it back and forth, and as I'm doing that, I'm lightly tapping on it and then side to side to make sure I get a nice clear impression. And I'll do that on delicate pieces too, as not to just give one solid hammer strike to make the stamp, but rather just do it gradually, just slowly tapping on it, lightly tapping on it until I get a nice impression. I'm just putting the pieces in an ultrasonic here to get any polishing compound off of it. Over to the steam cleaner to get off any type of impurities on it. And there's our nice finished pieces. I'd like to thank you guys for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please give me a like or subscribe. And if you have any questions, just leave them below. I have a few other videos here on YouTube that show other aspects of the design and casting process. So please check those out as well. Once again, I'm Nicholas DeMario of SterlingKisses.com. Thanks for watching.